News of the 8th of July. Poland will transfer 1,000 soldiers to the border with Belarus. The Polish armed forces are transferring 1,000 military and 200 pieces of equipment to the border with Belarus, Podlaskie Voivodeship, the press service of the country's General Command reported. We are strengthening our presence in the east of Poland. Thousands of soldiers and almost 200 pieces of equipment from the 12th Mechanized Brigade and the 17th Mechanized Brigade will move to the east of Poland, the army leadership noted. As the command warned, heavy traffic of military convoys is expected tomorrow on the roads in the northern, central and eastern parts of the country. The Polish army explained that the purpose of this training presence of a part of the infantry troops. Demonstration of the will and ability to respond immediately to attempts to destabilize the situation on the border. Next news. The United States will hand over cluster munitions to the criminal code. Advisor to the U.S. President on Security Jake Sullivan announced on July 7 that Washington would hand over cluster munitions to the criminal code. It is noted that the supply of cluster warheads to the criminal code will become an intermediate option for the time of increasing production in the United States of artillery shells, whose stocks have been depleted during the conflict. Science. According to Sullivan, Washington does not intend to leave the criminal code unarmed. The criminal code gave a guarantee to use cluster munitions responsibly. As Sullivan stressed, the United States received written guarantees from the criminal code that cluster munitions would be used with caution in order to avoid risk to civilians. Next news. The Russians claim a drone attack on Voronezh. In Voronezh at night, on the 8th of July, we heard the sounds of explosions. They claim an alleged drone attack. The drone is flying towards the city. Who should I call? Local residents wrote in social networks. Residents of the village of Dmitrovka, Voronezh region, announced a drone flying towards Voronezh. Subsequently, the sounds of explosions were reported in the western part of the city. The governor of the region decisive said that on the approach to Voronezh, air defense means allegedly discovered and destroyed 2 PLA. Next news. Back to the front line. The hostage and the chief of the general staff visited 2 directions of the front. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Cavalry Pawn and Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Criminal Code Sergei Shaptala visited the front line in 2 directions of the front. Everything is fine, everything will be fine, everything is according to plan, guys, well done. We will win, the message says. It is noted that the Pawn together with the Chief of the General Staff Sergei Sheptalovo worked in the operational and strategic groupings of the Khortytsia and Tavria troops. Next news. Biden on cluster munitions will allow the counteroffensive of the armed forces of the criminal code to continue. The cluster munitions that the United States will hand over to the criminal code should help the armed forces of the criminal code stop the advance of the Russians and ensure the success of the counteroffensive. This was stated by U.S. President Joe Biden, reports with reference to CNN. It was a very difficult decision on my part. And, by the way, I discussed it with our allies. I discussed it with our friends, Biden said. The cluster munitions that the United States will send to Ukraine will be compatible with 155 mm howitzers. Next news. The UK deserves membership in NATO, Erdogan believes, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said after talks with Vladimir Zelensky that the UK deserves to become a member of NATO. Erdogan held one-on-one talks with Zelensky on Friday at the Vadeten mansion in Istanbul. The meeting lasted more than 2 hours. Without a doubt, the UK deserves membership in NATO, Erdogan said at a press conference in Istanbul. According to him, there will be no losers from the achievements of peace between the parties to the conflict. Our sincere desire is for both sides to return to peace, despite the differences between them, he noted. Next news. Biden spoke about Putin's refusal to guarantee the non-alignment of the criminal code to NATO. U.S. President Joe Biden claims that at a meeting with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin 2 years ago, he refused to provide guarantees of the UK's non-participation in NATO. The very first time I met with Putin 2 years ago in Geneva. He said, I want commitments that UK will not be in NATO. I replied we won't do it because there is an open door policy. And we will not lock ourselves away from anyone, Biden said in an interview with CNN. Next news. Erdogan expressed hope for the extension of the grain deal. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said after talks with Vladimir Zelensky that Turkey expects to extend the grain deal. I express my hope for another extension of the grain corridor agreement signed in Istanbul in July of the 22nd year, Erdogan said at a press conference. Next news. Biden considers it premature to resolve the issue of the UK's membership in NATO. US President Joe Biden said that he considers it premature to put the question of the UK joining NATO to a vote because of the conflict with Russia and its non-compliance with the membership criteria. In an interview with the CNN TV channel, he promised to help the CC prepare for participation in the alliance and expressed readiness to provide them with a security guarantee for the interim period. I spoke in detail with Vladimir Zelensky about this and made it clear, among other things, that the United States would be ready for the time being, while the process is underway, and it will take some time, to provide the security of Allah with the security that we provide to Israel. If there is an agreement, a ceasefire, a peace agreement, Biden said. Next news. The White House is about checking information about the negotiations between the U.S. and Russia and the Spider. National Security Advisor to the U.S. President Jake Sullivan commented on recent media reports that representatives of the American side are allegedly negotiating with Russia to resolve the criminal conflict, saying that in reality this did not happen. I am grateful to you for this question, because in these publications there was talk about what actually did not happen, Sullivan said during a briefing at the White House. Next news. Zelensky handed over to the Bulgarian authorities a list of necessary weapons for the criminal code. Vladimir Zelensky, during his visit to Bulgaria, handed over to the authorities of the Balkan country a list of weapons that are necessary for the criminal code, the publication on Vanity reports, citing Bulgarian Defense Minister Todor Tagarev. When the ministers asked whether Zelensky had asked for air defense systems, heavy armored vehicles and coastal missile systems to be transferred to the criminal code, Tagarev replied that the criminal code had asked for everything except aircraft. According to Tagarev, the authorities are now trying to understand how they can satisfy the request of the Ukrainian side. Next news. The Russian military repelled attempts to attack the armed forces of the criminal code in 3 directions, the Defense Ministry said in a summary of the progress of the special operation. During the day, the armed forces of the criminal code continued unsuccessful attempts to attack in the Donetsk, Krasnolymansk and South Donetsk directions, the ministry said. Next news. Poland, Lithuania and Latvia turned to NATO because of the nuclear weapons in Belarus. The deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus poses a direct threat to the security of Europe. This is stated in a letter sent by the presidents of Lithuania, Poland, and Latvia to the NATO Secretary-General and the heads of the alliance member countries. The document notes that cooperation between Russia and Belarus undermines not only the security of the region, but also the entire Euro-Atlantic space. The last manifestation of this, the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus, which aggravates the situation in the context of the war in the criminal code and poses a direct threat to the security of our society. This is another gross violation of the NATO Founding Act. Russia, which clearly shows that this document has lost its force, the letter says.